Hey everyone, just wanted to do a quick explainer video because I know a lot of people are having trouble understanding how exactly gas works on the Ethereum network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an analogy of taking a trip in a car. And we'll compare that to a transaction on the Ethereum network. This is by far not perfect, but we'll see if we can make it work. So a few definitions. So when I talk about usage, what that is units of processing power. So anytime you run a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, it also acts as a network of a bunch of computers and allows you to run code on that network. So how much processing power it takes is the usage to get a transaction to go through. So I think that'll become a little bit more evident soon, but you get the idea. I hope it's a little bit different than Bitcoin and some of the other networks where they don't have smart contracts. They don't have the ability to actually, process code. They have the ability to do a smart contract, as in passing money from one person to another under certain conditions based upon an oracle. But that's beside the fact. In Ethereum, you do have the ability to run code, and that's what the smart contracts are all about. Some contracts require more usage than others. So no two transactions are going to be alike in terms of how much usage there is, even with the same. If two different people are using the exact same smart contract, the amount of usage it takes for their transaction to process may be different. Now, having said that, the gas rate is the price per usage that you're willing to pay. It's measured in something called GUI. Uh, GUI is the smallest unit of Ether on the Ethereum network. So GUI is gigaWI. So here's a quick demonstration of what exactly that means. So a gigaWI stands for point, and then there are 8 zeros, 1 Ethereum. So it's a very, very, very tiny amount of Ethereum. When you multiply that by the usage, that's how much you pay for your transaction fee, plain and simple. The gas limit is the maximum usage, the maximum transaction power, processing power that you are willing to pay. It will default to whatever is estimated as how much usage that transaction should take. So for example, sending money from one wallet to another or to yourself, it might estimate 21,000 units. Working with a smart contract, it may be 500,000 or it may be a million usage that it estimates it's going to cost you. So now that estimated transaction fee, you simply multiply the gas rate, whatever that GUI is that you agree to, times the limit in usage. So for example, if you agreed to 100 GUI and it was 100,000 was the limit that was set, your estimated transaction fee would be 0.01 Ethereum or Ether. For another example, if it was a million possible usage, then 100 being the assumed agreed upon rate at this moment times that million would come out to zero 0.1 Ethereum. So the amount of gas, and by the way, this is a pet peeve of mine, and hopefully after watching this, I won't hear you ever say it again, and that is, oh, the gas cost $200 today. Oh, the gas cost $150 today. No, there is no dollar amount. It's always in Ethereum, and it's controllable based upon what you set these two values to. What you set the GUI to, which you have the ability to do. Instead of just using slow, average, and fast like everybody else, you can go to custom or you can go to advanced in whatever wallet program you're using, and you can set these two amounts. Now, I would never lower the limit from the estimated amount, but you can raise it just to make sure that your transaction goes through and does not lose the gas. You don't miss out on it. So now, again, this is the estimated amount prior to the transaction running. So we don't know the actual usage yet. So you'll never pay this estimated amount unless you meet the actual estimated usage in terms of actual usage. So what do you actually pay? Your actual transaction fee is that same gas rate times the actual usage. So if it ended up, instead of being a million, if it was only 234,000, then your actual transaction fee will be 0.023457, as opposed to zero point 0.1, which was the estimated amount. So in this case, you're only paying 23% of what you were estimated it was going to cost. So keep in mind, you will pay this gas though, even if the transaction needs more usage than was set in the limit. So if you run out and you hit your limit before it's done processing, it will fail. So be sure that your limit is high enough. So now here's where the general idea of this, using a car trip analogy, when you take a trip, you tend to have a destination in mind. So think of this on the Ethereum network as how much processing power do you need to process your transaction? So now also, just like you can estimate the number of miles and how much fuel you believe you will need for your trip, you can't predict traffic jams. You can't predict sitting at lights. You never know what your actual amount of fuel used for your trip is going to be. So just like you can't know that ahead of time, you cannot know the exact usage you will need for your transaction ahead of time. So before committing the transaction, you will predetermine the price that you're willing to pay, kind of like deciding how much you're going to pay to fill up your gas tank when you get to the end of your destination. Whether you run out and you hit your limit, or you actually stop early and you meet your destination before you hit that limit, either way, you're agreeing to an amount that you're going to pay. You don't have to wait for the networks to get to a certain rate. I'm hearing all the time, somebody will say, oh, you should wait until 3 a.m, or you should wait until 7 o'clock at night, or whatever. We always see gas is slower. Well, don't wait. If you're going to try to time it, to me, that's kind of crazy. If you're trying to time that, you're betting that you're going to catch it at just the right time and put it in for a decent rate. If you set the rate, use your advanced settings, set the rate, set it somewhere that's reasonable, that the network has actually seen in some period of time in the past couple of days or whatever, and then just let it sit. And when the network gets to that rate, then your transaction will be picked up and be processed. So you have control over when it will be processed by setting how much you're willing to pay. The higher you agree to in terms of GUI, the faster your transaction may get picked up. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now let's talk about the fuel tank itself is sort of the limit. How far can we go before we run out of gas? We don't know if we're going to make it to our destination or not before that happens, right? This is usually preset or estimated by a smart contract. And again, like I said before, it's okay to raise that limit, but never lower it. You can, but you're going to risk a failed transaction. And if it stops and it hits that limit, you still pay the gas. You still have to refill your tank to be able to do another transaction later, if we're using this analogy. So now determining the actual usage, we don't know, like I said, if we're going to hit the limit before our destination or if we're going to get to our destination before we hit the limit. So before we reach the limit that we set, which is that maximum gas we agree to pay upon processing the transaction, that's the question. Can we reach that destination first? Can we get enough processing power to complete the transaction before we run out of our limit? So again, loss of gas or a failed transaction is when we reach our limit, but our destination was further. We did not have enough gas to reach that destination. In that case, the transaction does fail. So money does not reach the destination wallet or smart contract, but the gas is removed from your balance, from your wallet. Now, if you make it to the destination before you run out of your limit, then your transaction fee will be whatever the gas rate was times the usage needed to process that transaction. Usually, again, it's not the fully estimated amount. That transaction will then succeed, so the money reaches the destination wallet or smart contract, and you pay for the gas. So now I mentioned we talk more about how the gas rate controls the timing. The way that works is based upon three factors. The first and most important is how many other transactions are waiting to be processed. The second is what gas price or rate in GUI are you agreeing that you'll pay? And the third is based upon the limit that is set, which determines, your estimated usage, your estimated transaction fee. So the mining computers that are running the entire Ethereum network, they get a list of all transactions that are out there. They get passed around the entire network very quickly. It then sorts them by GUI from highest first to lowest. So only about 10 to 15 transactions can be processed per second. Now, when Ethereum 2.0 comes out, well, it's here, but it's not fully implemented. So about a year from now, around, I'm guesstimating March of 2022, it'll be fully implemented. And at that point, you'll be able to have 100,000 transactions per second. But as of right now, if there are 1,000 transactions in the queue, only the top 10 to 15 highest GUI amounts are going to be picked up. Now, any two transactions that have the same GUI amount, it will then go by the highest limit. So if your limit is 1 million and somebody else's is 500,000 and somebody else's is 21,000, it's going to pick up the highest one first. And from that point on, if two transactions have the same GUI and they have the same limit, then the first one into the queue is the one that will be picked up when all other factors are equal. Now, how does the gas rate control the timing? Again, only about 10 to 15 transactions can be processed. So the time it takes to process your transaction depends on how many other transactions are in the queue. I hear on a regular basis, oh, my transaction's been waiting for an hour. It's been waiting for 2 hours. My transaction's been in there for 4 days. If your GUI amount is lower than all of the other transactions, and those transactions do not get processed prior to the system getting down to the point where it can process transactions with the GUI rate yours are set, your transaction will just sit. It will just wait. So if you set the GUI lower than the other transactions, you will wait until those other transactions all process first. Now, this includes, and this is why the gas rate, you see it jump up and down all the time. This includes any new transactions that enter the queue after yours. If they agree to a higher GUI amount than you do, the system will pick up their transactions first. Even though you put your transaction in a while ago, that is irrelevant in the way that transactions are picked up on the Ethereum network. So now what this can do is cause something called rate creep. So most people simply pick slow, average, or fast rather than going to the advanced settings or the custom settings, depending upon the terminology for the wallet you're using. Well, those averages are determined by a very, very, very small number of recent transactions that have been processed. What this means is the more people who pick fast, the higher the average rises. The more people who pick slow or set their rate to a specified lower amount on purpose, the lower the average drops as those transactions process. So until those lower cost transactions process, the average or the going rate, the rate that's reported on gas trackers or on Etherscan, those are going to be based upon transactions that have actually processed, not the transactions that are in the queue. So until the higher GUI transactions get processed, your transaction will sit and it's going to wait until that average comes down to lower than or equal to your agreed upon GUI rate. Now, you may wonder, why should I use a lower GUI then? Well, because you can always add more. You can add more GUI that you're willing to pay, but you can never lower the amount. So if you happen to put a transaction in while the average is around 150 GUI, but all day long, people have been getting transactions processed around 100, there may be a number of transactions that came in recently that drove the price up to 150 GUI. And if you don't know better, you might click on average and say, okay, I guess I have to pay 150 GUI. You don't. You have the ability to set it. You have no idea whether the going rate is going to go up or down, because that depends on how many other people, how many other transactions enter the network at the same time. But by setting it lower, again, you have the ability to speed it up later. So unless you're in a hurry, start below the average or slow rate. And then you see if your transaction gets picked up in any reasonable amount of time. So if it gets picked up within an hour or two, great. You just saved yourself money. If you could have paid 100, but you ended up paying 150 because you were in a hurry, that's half as much, again, gas. That's like going to the gas station and they say, oh, the gas rate right now is $2. Not telling you that if you waited just 2 hours, instead of paying $2, you could have paid $1, right? That's what's going on. It's always based upon how many transactions are processed recently. And if enough people keep clicking that fast button, it drives the average up. But if enough people know to start lower, and again, you can accelerate it, you can speed it up later by adding more GUI to it. You can never remove the amount, right? So put in the transaction, keep the limit at whatever it's set to, maybe higher. Set the gas rate, the GUI amount, down to something reasonable or to something that you're willing to pay. You may hope that the network, the gas rates will eventually get down to that point. And this will help everyone because it controls the Ethereum gas rates. So now, having explained all of this, let's look at some actual transactions on etherscan.io. So here's an example where if you look at the gas limit, which was 543,205, you'll see that's the amount that was estimated for this transaction. So that estimated amount at a gas price of 80 GUI comes out to 0.043 Ethereum. But you'll notice only 58% of that estimated usage was needed to process this transaction. Now, in this case, there were a number of things going on. This was to a smart contract. So it estimated that with all of the things it has to do, it's going to cost over 500,000 in usage. It ended up being 315,000. So in this case, the actual payment was 0.02 instead of 0.04 Ethereum. So now let's look at another one, which is much simpler. In this case, it's a simple wallet-to-wallet transfer. So the gas limit was estimated at 21,000 units. It ended up being 21,000 units. It used 100% of the limit, and it still was a successful transaction. So now in this case, the GUI rate was 276.3, which was significantly more than the last transaction we looked at. But because the usage was so low to make this transaction happen, both the estimated and the actual amount ended up being 0.005. So this is why you can't say, oh, gas is X or gas is Y. This is how much gas costs. It completely depends upon the usage of that particular transaction. So whether you're going from wallet to wallet, which is where you pay a lot less, or if you're going to a smart contract where there's a lot more processing that has to happen to figure out what happens, that will determine what your final gas rate is. Had I chosen on this particular transaction to say only 80 GUI, then it would have been significantly less than that other transaction. I was able to pay more because I wanted this transaction to go super fast. And the usage was only 21,000, which I knew because that's what's estimated when you put the transaction in. Therefore, the amount that is actually paid for this transaction was only 0.005, even though the GUI rate was significantly higher. So one more example. Here's a case where it says in the warning, out of gas. I also hear a number of people talking about transactions failed, and I tried again and it failed, and I tried again and I failed. You just wasted a ton of Ethereum, a ton of gas, because when the transaction failed, as we described above, and it ran out of the limit. Now, in this case, when I did a second transaction, I made sure that the usage was much higher. And the gas that was needed for the transaction was actually 195,000. 169,000 was estimated for this particular smart contract. It was low, therefore, it didn't have enough to process 195,000. I had to pay at 84 GUI the full estimated amount, which was 0.014 Ethereum for that transaction. That was lost, that was gone, it was given to the miners. It's not given to the smart contract, it's not given to the wallet address if you're sending it directly to somebody else. That goes to the miners for trying to process this transaction. It ran out of processing power because it was declared, I will not pay for more than 169,927. And because it needed more, it needed almost 200,000, they had to cancel the transaction. It's marked canceled. The money stays in my wallet, but the transaction fee was spent either way. So I hope that helps a little bit with your understanding of how gas works, so that you're not one of the new people who think, oh, gas costs $200 or something along those lines. You have complete control over the timing. You have complete control over when your transaction gets picked up and how much you're going to spend on it. So good luck, and I hope you enjoy whatever it is that you're buying with Ethereum.